Hi everyone, this is Travels with an Archaeologist. I'm the archaeologist, now let's get into the travels. Today I want to talk about roads. No, not those roads. There you go, that roads. So why are we doing roads, or more specifically focusing on the Bronze Age of it in particular? Well, frankly because I don't feel like doing research this week, and roads is what I did my dissertation on. So basically all the research is already done for me. So that means that my source this week for this video, me. And that's one of the only times I'm going to be allowed to say that. What, not good enough for you? Alright, well, here's some other sources as well. So another thing is I am legitimately one of the top 5 global experts on the subject. Now, yes, there are very few experts on the subject in general, but that doesn't change the fact that I am among them. So that's why I'm doing something that I haven't done before. I'm actually going to release something on Patreon. That's right, it's my dissertation. And granted, it is terribly dry. Nevertheless, if you would like a lot more detailed, boring information, you can go onto my Patreon and view it. I will also say that a lot of this information, when I was studying it, I spoke to Tula Marketu in person, and she probably means nothing to most of you, but she is the head of Dodecanese archaeology in Rhodes, as well as the leading global expert on Bronze Age Rhodes, which is, as I said, where my study comes in. Now, firstly, Rhodes was a major hub of trade. This island sits on the corner of the Aegean, and this stretch of Turkish coast in the Bronze Age had no ports. This means that Rhodes was the first and last port of call from Cyprus, putting it in the middle of trade from the Black Sea and Italy onto the Levant and Egypt. But who were these elusive original Rhodians? Well, that's the question that I set out to answer when I did my research. Now, the obvious answer might be Greeks, but that actually isn't so simple in the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age is split into different eras depending on the chronology you use, but at any rate, it extends from approximately 3000 BC until the Bronze Age collapsed around the turn of the second millennium BCE. And people who lived during this time weren't Greeks, at least not as we think of them. They were instead broadly split into 3 types of cultures: the Cycladic, who are of course named for the Cyclades, the Minoans of Crete, and the Mycenaeans of the mainland. Eventually, the Mycenaeans would conquer the other 2 cultures. As near as the archaeological evidence would say, they kind of did a conquering thing. Right, now Rhodes has typically been treated as its own entity in the early Bronze Age, and then it had a Minoan established port in the Middle Bronze Age, and then it was outright conquered by the Mycenaeans in the Late Bronze Age. But this is actually wrong. And I'm probably one of the only archaeologists in the world to say that this is wrong, and that's through my extensive research of the area. I actually found that Rhodes remained its own entity throughout the entire Bronze Age, creating almost a unique 4th culture in the Aegean. And this is because most of the research takes place around the port of Ialissos, this port here, which is treated as the main port of Rhodes. Now, 2 things are important to note here. Firstly, while Ialissos was a major port, there is no reason to conclude it was the only one, which is what many scholars in this field have done. Secondly, Ialissos itself has only been about 20% excavated, maybe about 25%, according to what Miss Marketu seems to have thought when she dug it and relayed the information to me. Indeed, combing through the evidence, I found reasonable suspicions to conclude that there were at least 4 ports on Rhodes, including Lindos. Now, Lindos has a strong classical history and a lot of ruins, but it has never been excavated to the Bronze Age level. We see the evidence of a port underneath the classical ruins of Kalmiros as well, and then perhaps another one even here at Monolithos. Not to mention the southeastern coast of the island, while it is considered more treacherous in terms of waves and wind, also offers better harbors for smaller vessels. Now, look here at the harbor of Lindos. If the classical Greeks could make it work, there's no reason to suspect that others couldn't either, especially as the Minoans were master seafarers, and they weren't the only ones. These ports could have acted as anchorages for all sorts of ships, including pirates, and you can never discount piracy in the Eastern Mediterranean. And that's not even including the interior, where there is evidence of styles and artifacts that simply aren't found anywhere else in the Aegean. Rhodes itself acted as a trading hub throughout its history, and evidence of every culture of the era can be found there. Rhodes' place in the Bronze Age world has been seen as a Mycenaean colony as well, due to the absence of Anatolian finds, but this isn't totally true. Again, Bronze Age roads isn't excavated, with some things only known from what we call surface finds. The name should be self-explanatory, and there has been Anatolian material found on surface finds, especially around the Lindos area. Now, I should note that surface finds mean next to nothing without excavation, but they are useful for my argument because they are indicators that there are things to find there, usually in greater abundance deeper down. And this kind of highlights the issue that I pointed out in my paper, which is that roads in the Bronze Age needs just far more research. And again, if you want to see cited evidence of all these things I found, you can access my paper on Patreon. But needless to say, I do have sources that will help me back up my argument. A lot of our known evidence comes from just two sources: the Mycenaean tombs and the development of a surfing resort allowing Tula Marketu to dig up the portions of Ialassos, which I was then able to talk to her about and see the evidence for in their museum. And it's important to note that Marketu's excavations revealed a lot that was previously unknown about Bronze Age roads, and even things which contradicted past research. There is even a couple of research from the 1950s who claimed that Ialissos was actually not that important a port and probably wasn't developed until much later. Anyway, point is there's a lot of technical stuff on Bronze Age roads, including the potential lost kingdom of Ahiyawa, but because there's not a lot of it to see, perhaps we should move on. I'll discuss more proper Mycenaean and Minoan history in other respective videos, but let's keep things simple today and say that Rhodes wasn't simple. It was definitely a part of the Mycenaean and Minoan worlds, but it was not bound to them. Now, following the Bronze Age collapse, we do reach the Classical period on Rhodes, and this is an era you actually can visit, unlike my research. These previous Bronze Age polities carried over into the Classical period, and the earliest Greek records tell us not of one, but of three poleis on the island: Ialassos, Kalmiros, and Lindos. These city-states were in a state of warfare throughout the early Classical period. However, soon all of them joined the Delian League, an alliance of city-states under the hegemony of Athens. The unity on Rhodes actually worked, too. In 404 BCE, these three smaller cities came together to form one big city, that being the modern-day city of Rhodes. Rhodes emerged as a major player in the later Classical era, just as Athens declined and the Delian League was disbanded. This ancient city of Rhodes had Helios as its patron, which perhaps describes another nickname for the Island of the Sun. Rhodes really flourished in the 3rd century BCE, as following the conquests of Alexander the Great, the huge mainland Greek powers had been subdued, allowing Rhodes to flourish without outside interference as part of the Hellenistic world. It was during this time that they constructed the Colossus of Rhodes in 280 BCE to celebrate their victory over Demetrius. However, an earthquake took it down in 226, just over 50 years later, and the ruins of it were gradually removed. Today, nothing remains of it. But Rhodes didn't stop being important. The island entered the Roman Empire and became particularly important in the Byzantine Empire. There was a huge monastery on the island at Mount Philermos, the mountain above Ialissos. Greek monasteries and Greek Orthodoxy proved particularly long-lasting, and despite the end of Orthodox rule in 1306, it remained the most practiced religion on the island. In 1204, however, Constantinople was sacked by Crusaders. Rhodes fell into the hands of independent Byzantine noble families and briefly Genoese sailors until 1306, when it was conquered by the Knights Hospitaller. The Knights Hospitaller built the massive Crusader fortress on the island in the city of Rhodes, and you can see it from just about everywhere in the city. The fortified harbor was defended by 3 massive walls with a fully functional city inside. It was the pinnacle of a medieval fortress, nearly impregnable, and it was from here the Knights of Rhodes acted as their own country and as a buffer against the expanding Turks. Rhodes experienced a revival of sorts under the Crusaders, and the island continued to bring in wealth as a major hub of trade, just as it did in the Bronze Age. It gained particular interest as a Christian bulwark and base from which to conduct campaigns against the Ottomans, but this meant the Ottomans also wanted to conquer it. The siege of Rhodes lasted several months, and in December of 1522, the Ottomans at last breached the walls and removed the Knights of Rhodes from the island. The Knights fled to Malta and became the Knights of Malta, where they remained until the Napoleonic Wars. Rhodes, meanwhile, experienced about 400 years of Ottoman rule, which saw the development of mosques and modern infrastructure. While Greece declared independence, Rhodes remained under Ottoman rule and became a haven for Jewish minorities fleeing persecution. In 1912, Italy seized the island from Turkey in a war, and sadly it remained in Italian hands during World War II when the Jewish population was shipped off to concentration camps in the European mainland. The Turks, however, did what they could, and the consul Selahattin ul Kumen helped to remove several dozen Jewish families from the island and harbored them in Turkey. And after the war, in 1947, Rhodes was finally reunited with Greece, where it remains today. Now, Rhodes today is a major tourist destination, especially for partiers and beach holidays, and as such, there's a lot to do for both families and partiers, and enough for a little of both. Tourism is far and away the island's chief source of income, and as such, there's a lot of options of where to stay and where to go. Avoiding the inner city will provide you with cheaper food, and going around the rest of the island is well worth it. Lindos is definitely a city to go out of your way to see, and though the hike up to the Greek city of Rhodes is long, it is rewarding. And if you really don't feel like hiking, there's transport, cabs, and other means to get up there. All in all, I liked being there and studying the island. If I had one regret, it was that I went alone for the purposes of study, and I didn't have a lot of time or company to enjoy the more touristy parts of the island. But hey, all that means is that I've done the research for you, so you can go and enjoy the rest of your holiday. And anyway, if you've made it to this point and gotten through my technical babble in the beginning, congratulations, and thank you. Until next time, I'm the Archaeologist, and this has been The Travels.